Now I'd like to introduce LWV San Diego President, Lori Thiel.
Great. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Kim. Thanks so much for that introduction and the information. I'd also like to thank our co-sponsors today, San Diego API Coalition, Asian Business Association San Diego, and the National Association of Asian American Professionals San Diego. I'm going to give anybody who wants to put their name in the chat as an elected official a few more minutes, and I'm going to update you all on some upcoming events and invite you all to attend. The first one we have that I'd like to talk about is May 8th at 10 o'clock. If you were here in time to see the video that played pre-webinar today, you will see that it was highlighted in there. It's called Women's Equality at Home and Abroad. Our own Ann Hoiberg, who is a league member and past president of this league and also a delegate to the United Nations Association on the Commission of the Status of Women, will be updating us on the most recent reporting out at the recent meeting that the United Nations had regarding women's equality. Also in May, on Tuesday, the 27th, our next Live with the League, we will meet San Diego's new City Council members. It will include District 1's Joe LaCava, District 3's Stephen Whitburn, and District 7's Raul Campillo. Then on June 7 through 13 is the state convention, the LWV California's convention. We have it every other year. It will host workshops and caucuses, and we also will have a plenary session. So I'll put the link to the convention website in the chat, but go take a look and see if you'd like to register. You can go as just a general attendee and get a sense of what the league does and watch us do business. So that would be fun. Another business meeting that we're hosting in June is our own league, the San Diego League's annual meeting. It's similar to the convention. We conduct business there. We adopt next fiscal year's budget and program, and we also vote on our slate of nominees for officers and directors in the coming year. So let me just check the chat and see if we have anybody to recognize here. Yeah, we do. Thanks everyone who added themselves. So I'd like to recognize Nicole Crosby, who's the Chief Deputy San Diego City Attorney and candidate for San Diego City Council District 6. Paula Hall, Governing Board Member, Sweetwater Union High School District. Mickey, who served 2 terms on the Palo Alto City Council, and Anthony Nguyen, District Director, representing the office of Congressman Scott Peters. We like to recognize people who have taken the step to run for office. We know that being a civil servant is a very difficult task, and an elected official deserves recognition for their willingness to participate in our society and provide service to our voters and their constituents. So I want to thank you all for joining us today. And with that, I'll hand it back over to Kim.
Thanks, Lori. Today's event is entitled Confronting Racism, Embracing Diversity. Our panelists will discuss the tragic history of AAPI discrimination in America, focusing on the intersectionality of misogyny and racism among AAPI women. We'll learn about how our local Asian business community fared over the past year, while national figures spewed dangerous and racially motivated rhetoric to scapegoat Asian Americans. And we'll find out what we can do to support AAPI businesses and embrace the entire community during AAPI Heritage Month in May. Today, we are featuring 3 speakers, Corinne Makapugai, Judy Key, and Lauren Garces. We'll begin with Corinne, who is a mother, educator, and community organizer. She is a professor of social work for San Diego City College, trustee for Southwestern Community College, and serves as commissioner for the California Commission on APIA Affairs. Corinne founded Asian Pacific Islander Community Actions to serve as a hub for grassroots efforts, including the People's Collective for Justice and Liberation, the Kuya Ate Mentorship Program, and formerly Made in Paradise Hills, Phil-Am Fest, Viet Vote, and Project Rio collective events. She is on the board for the San Diego API Coalition and a core member of FIERCE, a statewide policy and advocacy coalition. She has published various works on social work, her Indigenous heritage, and her experiences growing up in Paradise Hills. Corinne?
Thank you so much for having me, everyone, and for taking the courage and the steps to address hate in this very pivotal, crucial time in our nation's history. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing screen. And what I'm going to kick us off with today is a history, a brief history of hundreds of years of racism, discrimination, unfortunately, that has happened against our API community. We also saw discrimination in very personal ways. In the 1930s, there was not much immigration of API women to the US for a myriad of reasons. So at the time, you started to see our Asian and Pacific Islander men date white women. And that didn't make a lot of people happy. In January 27th of 1933, the California Court of Appeals ruled that Filipinos were considered Malaysian and were not allowed to marry white women. These images here are of our Filipino bachelors in Central America, Central California at the time, who were not allowed to date and marry women. And the fear of those Filipino men by white men was so rampant that they were attacked. Men were killed, they were lynched. You had Filipino clubs that were bombed. And this speaks to, again, the fact that for in any of our interracial couples, they weren't even allowed to exist and to love and to be married until recently. In 1983, another unfortunate example we have is the murder of Vincent Chin. He was a Chinese American, a young man, actually celebrating his bachelor party. He was about to be married in a couple of days. When he was out having a good time with his friends in Detroit, during the time when there was much outsourcing and leaving of our local automotive manufacturing plants. There was a lot of resentment at the time against anyone who appeared to be Asian. There was blame on Japanese car manufacturers and Asian workers. He was just out with his friends when two men, Evans and Nitz, decided to start a fight with him because they blamed him for the loss of their jobs. He unfortunately lost his life that night. And their repercussions were to pay a $3,000 fine. They were on probation for a couple of years and did not serve jail time. Fast forward to today, and there's so much history that we're trying to encompass in a few minutes. We are seeing after 9/11 and even recently, again, more discriminations and targeting of people. We've seen the Muslim ban. And now with the pandemic, we are seeing our people targeted for a pandemic that is for a virus that is literally killing us too. In February 29, 2020, we saw APIs rise up to really push back on the rhetoric Kim mentioned earlier, the rhetoric that we were hearing calling this a Chinese flu. And again, blaming people of Asian descent for this virus. It was happening so much that a nationwide organization called Stop API Hate was formed. And what Stop API Hate does, we also partner with them as a coalition, is to track these incidences of hate against API people. Even then, we know that the numbers are likely underreported. Here in San Diego, we know that there have been at least 42 incidences of hate targeting API people just between March and December of last year alone. One of my dear friends and her family, her 6-year-old mother and her 17-year-old daughter were victims themselves. They were walking in a street in San Marcos, just taking a nice family stroll when a car pulled up and an entire group of people came out yelling at them, blaming at them for coronavirus, and tried to physically attack her 17-year-old daughter. The irony of all that too is that my friend is a nurse herself. She spends her life trying to heal others. So that was very painful for her. She was one of those incidences here. What have we tried to do? We've come together as a coalition We were formed to really communicate with each other, collaborate amongst API serving organizations, and give voice to others who felt like they needed it. I want to mention back after 9/11 in 2001, there was a coalition formed back then too, because we were seeing attacks against our Sikh community members, which unfortunately we just saw a killing recently, the FedEx shooting, where there were Sikh community members who were killed. And we're continuing to see these painful incidences of hate, of people being harmed by those that they don't even know. And so with this coalition, we're continuing to raise that awareness. We passed a city resolution last year in June 2020 with Council Member Monica Montgomery and then Council President Georgia Gomez. In June 2020, we continue to advocate for having API representatives on city, county boards and commissions and advisories, because that representation and that voice is so key. We have been able to pass a resolution at the County of San Diego. Very grateful to Supervisors Nora Vargas and Nathan Fletcher for helping us pass that, and along with the Human Relations Commission. So this was an event, that was that press conference when we passed that resolution. And we also were able to introduce a proclamation with Mayor Alejandra Sotelo Solis in National City. We know that San Diego City Community College District, Grossmont Cuyamaca, Southwestern districts, they have also passed resolutions denouncing API hate. But more importantly, on top of all of that, while we're making resolutions, while we're putting really important words on paper to address and combat these incidences, we're making asks that benefit not just the well-being and safety of our API community, but other communities as well. We know that if we want safety and wellness, we need mental health services, we need to combat poverty, we need to make sure our people are taken care of and are doing well. And we understand that it takes this really holistic, comprehensive approach to address hate and strife amongst our communities. And so all that said, in a nutshell, that's just some of the history we face in our country. And I look forward to hearing any questions or comments at the end of the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Our next speaker, Judy Key, is a retired public school teacher who taught for 3 decades with San Diego Unified School District. After retirement, her volunteer work included Asian American Pacific Islander voter registration drives, candidate support, and civic engagement and policy advocacy projects. Judy served on the California Commission on Asian and Pacific Islander American Affairs from 2012 to 2016. The California legislature presented her with a resolution of recognition for outstanding commitment to the advancement of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. In May 2019, the Joint API Legislative Caucus in Sacramento selected her as an API Heritage Month honoree and presented her with the Excellence in Civic Engagement Award. Judy remains active in her community, volunteering in issue advocacy and mentoring new candidates for political office. Judy?
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share my experience with you today. I'm an immigrant from Hong Kong. I've lived in the United States since 1974. The racism I've encountered may shock some of you, and I'll do my best not to become too emotional because this is very personal. Just as I think that we're making good progress in this country and becoming a more enlightened society, we take a giant step backwards. It is so disheartening. Prejudice against Asian Americans have deep roots in our country's history. To quote Congressman Ted Lieu, when Americans become fearful, they lash out and they find someone to scapegoat. Historically, Asian American Pacific Islanders, or AAPIs, have been blamed for all the calamities in the United States. The current explosion of hate incidents and hate crimes against AAPIs is a consequence of the pandemic's heavy toll on American society, fueled by the hateful rhetoric of some very powerful individuals. In our conversation about racism today, I'm going to discuss how the intersectionality of racism and misogyny threaten the safety of Asian American women. Nearly 70% of the recent hate incidents and hate crimes are targeted at women. So day in and day out, this is what I see in the media. AAPIs are invisible. We're brushed aside or simply erased. We're not even part of the dialogue or the conversation on gender and racial equity. I see this and I just get so infuriated. It's like, hello, we're here. Growing up in Hong Kong, I know that my mom visited a Chinese massage therapist for her chronic arthritis. Acupressure helped restore my mom's health. I want people to think about this when they think about Asian-owned spas and Asian massage therapists. Many of these hardworking women are providers for their family. Not only do they break through the knots in our backs and shoulders, they push through socioeconomic barriers to improve the lives for their family. These are strong women. They are grandmothers, mothers, sisters who should be valued for their hard work. But that's not the story that the media told. The shooter in Atlanta spoke about his motivation, and he described himself as having a sex addiction and pointed to the businesses he targeted as the source of temptation. Too many people assumed that spas he targeted were associated with prostitution. Jumping to the conclusion that Asian-owned spas provide cover for sex work not only ignores studies that suggest workers are sexually victimized by customers, but reflects the double standards that immigrants face all too often. The number and variety of Asian spas operating in America has grown rapidly. I personally get treatments at a Chinese-owned spa that offers acupressure. I also know many people who enjoy soaking their tired feet and undoing the stress of their workday at Asian-owned spas. History will explain why these assumptions are commonplace. We cannot ignore how racism and sexism provided the context for the shooter in Atlanta. Preceding the Chinese Exclusion Act, there is a lesser known act named the Page Act of 1875. The 1875 Page Act was enacted to exclude any Chinese immigrant deemed undesirable. Page included Chinese women, whom he thought were universally engaged in prostitution. The Page Act became the most successful of several efforts in the late 19th century to selectively target and exclude Chinese women from immigrating to the United States on the grounds that they are, as possible sex workers, were a corrupting force to this nation. With Page Act's passage, virtually all Chinese women were selectively denied entry into the United States because of their race and gender. This is one of the earliest examples of legal exclusion of an immigration population based on race and gender. And that predates the more well-known Chinese Exclusion Act by nearly a decade. This legislation is important in women's history in the United States because it laid the foundation for the country's hypersexualization of Chinese women and the denigration in the media. Chinese women were seen as a threat to the institution of marriage, a danger to white males, and stigmatized as being unclean. Most of the Chinese women have no affiliation with prostitution. They immigrated for better lives and economic stability at the height of the gold rush in California. Racism doesn't always come in the form of a white hood. I immigrated to the US from Hong Kong in 1974. Asians were a rarity back then. I was stared at everywhere I went like I was from another planet. After the fall of Saigon a year later, things got much worse for me. Subtle racism became more blatant and overt. Asian women were fair game to verbally assault or to proposition. You know, words do hurt. I can write about a book about those experiences, but that will be another conversation for another day. Asian American women are stereotyped as quiet, subservient, and obedient. Or we are diabolical dragon ladies. I do not have the time to get into how Hollywood had helped perpetuate these stereotypes. One inclusive Oscar show does not wipe out decades of stereotypes. Please check out Samantha Bee's wonderful video, Hollywood's Walk of Shame, the history of Asian stereotypes in pop culture. While there is long history of racism against Asian Americans, we also have a long history of resistance. I want to share with you 3 of our pioneering Asian American women whose giant shoulders we stand on, who did not allow racism and misogyny break their spirits. Patsy Takemoto Mink stands 5 feet tall, but was larger than life. She began her life on a Maui sugar plantation. She was rejected from medical school because she was a woman. She then attended law school, and she was one of 2 women and the only woman of color in her class. In 1965, Patsy rose to become the first Asian American woman and woman of color in the United States Congress. While in Congress, she spoke up for poor people and for women. Those were not popular topics. A firecracker and a fighter, she continually pushed the limits of what was acceptable. She spoke out against the Vietnam War. Her view was that it was a civil war. We have no business being over there. That unpopular view didn't win her any friends in high places. She entered the 1972 presidential primary, making her one of the first women to seek the nation's highest office. She co-authored Title IX with Edith Green, the landmark legislation that opened higher education and athletics to women. 98% of college sports budget went to men's sports. Coaches fought Title IX tooth and nail, and to this day, they continue to fight this. Patsy Mink served in Congress for a quarter of a century. In her lifetime, the percent of women in Congress rose from 1% to 15%. We need to flip that. Let's make that 51%. When she died in 2002, Title IX was renamed the Patsy Mink Equal Opportunity in Education Act. This is a documentary I highly recommend. Patsy Mink, Ahead of the Majority, explores the remarkable political story of Patsy Mink, an Asian American woman who, battling racism and misogyny, redefined American politics. Mink's political journey was lonely and difficult. Dispelling stereotypes as compliant Japanese female, she battled misogyny within her own party, whose leaders disliked her independent style and openly maneuvered against her. She was on a TV show and the male host asked the congresswoman from Hawaii to perform a hula dance. Would they ever ask a man to do that? Her liberal politics, particularly her vocal opposition to the Vietnam War, was met with intense criticism. I had the pleasure of meeting Kimberly Basford at the San Diego Asian Film Festival in 2008. She is the young woman who wrote, produced, and directed this film. This is a beautiful documentary about a remarkable woman. The daughter of Chinese immigrants, Marge Fong Yu was born in 1922 near Modesto, California. Her parents operated a laundry there. And later when they moved to San Francisco, they also opened up a laundry there. Although Marge was a straight A student, her high school counselor told her not to count on becoming a scientist because nobody would hire a Chinese person. In 1966, she was elected to the California State Assembly, representing Oakland and Castro Valley. She was the first Asian American woman elected to a state legislature in the entire country. She served for 4 terms. In 1974, March Fong Yu was elected as Secretary of State in California, becoming the first Asian American woman ever elected to a state constitutional office in this country. She served for 5 terms. She remained the only woman to serve in the California Secretary of State until 2006, when voters elected Deborah Bowen. March Fong Yu resigned in 1994 when President Bill Clinton nominated her for an ambassadorship. In April of '69, March Fong Yu smashed a porcelain toilet with a sledgehammer on the steps of our Capitol building. To her, pay toilets symbolized the second-class status of women. Urinals were free. In 1974, after 5 years of her tireless campaigning, California finally banned pay toilets in public buildings. Her actions opened up dialogue in the fight for equality. Whether it is razors, dry cleaning, or personal hygiene products, women pay more for gender-specific products than men. In 2019, California's Secretary of State building in Sacramento was named the March Fong Yu Secretary of State building. This is the first state-owned building to be named after an Asian American woman. During her 2 decades as Secretary of State, she was credited with introducing California to include candidate statements in ballot pamphlets, voter registration by mail, voter registration at DMVs, and providing absentee ballots to any voters requesting one. I'm proud to say that I have voted for March Fong Yu on the California ballot numerous times. Tammy Duckworth was born in Thailand, a biracial daughter of a Thai Chinese mother and an American father. She spent her childhood moving between Thailand, Cambodia, Indonesia, and Singapore. Tammy went to high school and college in Hawaii, and then attended graduate school in Washington, D.C. and Illinois. Tammy's family moved to Hawaii when she was 16. They had to leave her mom behind in Asia because 1, they couldn't afford another plane ticket, and 2, mom did not have the right immigration status. In Hawaii, her father was too proud to take on low-level jobs, leaving the family homeless, and Tammy holding the family together, doing odd jobs on the streets of Oahu, and at the same time maintaining good grades in high school. Tammy Duckworth served as an Army lieutenant colonel and became one of the only a handful of female helicopter pilots. She was in Iraq for 8 months before that fateful day. In 2004, she was shot down in her Black Hawk helicopter. The rocket-propelled grenade landed on her lap, severed both of her legs, and pulverized her right arm. She spent 13 months at Walter Reed Hospital recovering and learning to walk again. I had the pleasure of meeting her in 2008 at an API caucus in Denver. I have been a fangirl ever since then. Because of her advocacy for amputees while at Walter Reed, Tammy Duckworth was asked to serve at the Department of Veterans Affairs. She also served in the House of Representatives in 2013 to 2016. She won a Senate seat in 2016. She is now the junior senator from Illinois. I highly recommend her memoir, Every Day is a Gift. She is funny, determined, and all around a badass woman. She had me laughing so hard all the time and crying at the same time. I have so much respect for her. As you can see, I didn't want to leave you all just without fears. I also want to leave you with hope. We want you to acknowledge what is happening to us, and we want you to hear us, we want you to see us, and we want you to be our true allies. We need you to bear witness like Darnella Frazier, the 17-year-old who had the presence of mind to record the critical 9 minutes and 29 seconds video. We want policies that will change the culture of hatred towards our AAPI, Black and Brown sisters and brothers. Most importantly, we want our seat at the table. We want you, League of Women Voters, to help elect more Patsy Mings, March Fong Yus, and Tammy Duckworth, Because you know what? Representation does matter. It matters a whole lot. Here are some of the wonderful resources for bystander training and the website that Corinne talked about, Stop AAPI Hate. So let's make the leap from protest to policy change. Passing the COVID-19 Hate Crime Act is a good start. This legislation will assign an official in the Justice Department to review and expedite all reports of hate crimes related to the coronavirus and expand support for local and state law enforcement agencies responding to these hate crimes. It passed with bipartisan support on April 22nd. The vote was 94-1. So thank you so much. And the last but not least there, the Asian American Education Project was launched with the release of 50 lesson plans on Asian American history. Within days, 500 teachers, most not of Asian descent, signed up for these free training to learn how to use the plans, because everything really starts with education. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Judy. And as a reminder to our attendees, please submit any questions that you have for the speakers using the Q&A button in Zoom, and we'll get to those after our third and final speaker. Lauren Garces is a citywide event producer and artist focusing on diverse community empowerment and sustainable, inclusive economic development. Her event production passion and engagements are dedicated to providing platforms and connections for diverse communities and cultures to be highlighted, bridged, and empowered. She directs the marketing, outreach, and events with the Asian Business Association San Diego, representing over 30,000 Asian Pacific Islander-owned businesses. Her work is bridged as the Special Events Director of the Convoy District, one of Southern California's largest Pan-Asian economic hubs. She serves as President of the National Association of Asian American Professionals San Diego, and was recognized last month by Mayor Todd Gloria as a Woman of Distinction. Lauren?
Thank you everyone for allowing me to be part of this space. Thank you for also being here to listen today. We had some amazing lessons taught to us by Corinne and Judy, just about the history that we're still facing today. Again, all of that, all of those inactions led to a lot of the conversations in our families that we are facing today. And for my presentation today, I really wanted to talk about the actions that we all could be taking in our communities, the ways that we can be coming together to support our communities hit the hardest. And I'll be talking about that from the perspective of the businesses that we have here locally in San Diego of Asian and Pacific Islander descent and owned and operated. So speaking a little bit to the work of what we did, I wanted to really start with this picture specifically. Last year in 2020, we were proud, and we still are very proud, that the Convoy District, and for those of you who haven't been able to visit it, it's this wonderful little triangle between the 163, the 52, and then the 805. And it's really an area where the Pan-Asian businesses in San Diego have really come to thrive. It's a very industrial area. That's where your cars can get serviced. There's all kinds of business services in the area. But at the same time, it's this blossoming of Asian and Pacific Islander culture and businesses that we love to enjoy their food, their drinks, and all these wonderful places that we're able to celebrate at. And so last year in 2020, we did come together, Asian Business Association Convoy District. You'll see Councilmember Chris Cate there. At the time, it was Assembly Member Todd Gloria, who is now our mayor in San Diego, and then also the owners of Cross Street Chicken and Beer, to name the Convoy District the Pan-Asian Cultural Business and Innovation Hub in San Diego, to really emphasize the hard work and history that's behind the area, but also to attribute to the future that we see it growing and building. And we always want to continue to recognize the impact that these cultures and that these businesses have contributed to that here in this beautiful little hub. So I wanted to start with that. I want to give some grace to all of us speaking. Judy spoke on it a little bit earlier, but you know, it's going to be hard in the next couple of slides talking about this because these are all present day things. So I just wanted to also start with a little bit about me so you know where I'm coming from. I am an event producer with my company, Social Artistry. These are just a few of the events that I've worked on. I really like to emphasize that I work with multicultural communities. I work with diverse, underserved communities. And it's very important for me to listen to their needs and create a platform for them to again, feel empowered themselves to grow and contribute to the beautiful city that we're part of. So things like the Linda Vista Multicultural Fair and Parade, which stemmed essentially from being a pan-Asian immigration to the Linda Vista neighborhood during the World War. And they were using this event to bridge their communities through language because they couldn't understand each other, but they wanted to show that they were welcoming of their neighbors. So they did the Linda Vista Multicultural Fair and Parade to transcend those language barriers and really come together to show that, hey, we're a community together and we want to make sure that you feel welcome. So stem that to today. I am the special events director for the Convoy District. I also do marketing outreach and events for the Asian Business Association. That bridges to my work with the National Association of Asian American Professionals, secretary with the San Diego Asian Pacific Islander Coalition, which now has over 30 wonderful organizations that are serving the API community, coming together to bridge, again, more of these conversations and give more resources to our communities and also amplify their voices. I am 100% Filipina, she, her pronouns, and then I also hail from the island of Oahu. So I think it's important to share that just because I grew up in an environment where it was very diverse. It was just a beautiful melting pot of all these Asian Pacific Islander cultures. And I came to San Diego for college. I came to SDSU, got my business administration marketing degree, class of 2014. But it was a culture shock for me because obviously it's not as diverse as a place like Hawaii, but at the same time, I knew that there was so many places and hubs that we could share our cultures in. And I really wanted to stem and connect my work in that. So that's why I got into event production, and that's why I work with so many diverse communities today. So again, that's just a little bit of my background. I've been doing this work for over a decade though, and you know, last year, again, during the start of the pandemic, what we were seeing in our community was a very interesting shift during the Lunar New Year. The Lunar New Year, for those of you who don't know, is the mark of the new calendar for a lot of, especially Pan-Asian cultures. They celebrate the new year during the Lunar New Year. And it's a very special time for our friends and family to come together. Oftentimes our community will fly all the way home to other countries to be with their family during this very special time, to usher in good luck for their families. And then also, again, be with each other, be with their community. And so this is a photo from some of the fairs that we've had here in San Diego celebrating the Lunar New Year. But we were seeing a shift last year during this time because we were noticing, again, there was conversations and of a virus. There was conversations of like, is it safe to go to Asian businesses? Is it safe to go to events where Asians are at? And I feel like that was very obviously misattached to the Asian community during that time, just because of where people were hearing it was coming from, and then associating it with Asians in general. So we were seeing a shift during the Lunar New Year last year, and that was also affecting our Asian businesses, Asian Pacific Islander businesses. They were noticing less people coming to their restaurants, or again, people having rumors in their chats of whether they should go or not, whether it was safe or not to come to these events. And the businesses felt the effects of that. So what we ended up doing is we came together with our elected officials after seeing and observing this in our communities. We came together with Council Member Chris Kate, Supervisor Nathan Flesher, and we had a press conference in the Convoy District. So the picture there is right in front of the Jasmine seafood restaurant, where we're very used to having large galas, large celebrations for the Lunar New Year, but we were getting a lot of effects of these events being canceled or are not happening. And so it was very important for us to come together towards the beginning of the pandemic when we were seeing this to really say, you know, this virus is not due to any specific race. It's going to know no bounds when it comes to race, but we can't be attaching that misguided judgment onto our Asian businesses who were, again, feeling the impacts of less people coming, a very special time for our community when, again, friends and family usually come, but they were, again, feeling the effects of people's speech and how important that is when we're talking with each other. So it manifested in that way, and we came together again with elected officials. We came together with health officials. So we had someone from, I believe, Kaiser Permanente and their team to again show support. Lots of business owners came to the press conference as well to let people know that we need to support our community during these tough times, and we can't attribute that to again their businesses. And so it was hard overall in general for businesses last year. We were getting the news as it was coming out. I think you all very much can remember and feel those. We're still feeling those effects too, of just finding out the news as it was happening. And one of the main things that ended up happening was our shutdown. And then that immediately, of course, shut down our businesses. And for our businesses in the area, it's very also important to note that, you know, again, they speak multiple languages. They get their news in different ways. And they may not know essentially what's going on. So it was very important for us in the beginning to come together as a convoy district. We came together with the Asian Business Association. We created a letter to all of them, and we translated this letter into multiple languages. So they were able to again, get this information in their language to make it easier on them to understand what's going on. And we let them know, us as nonprofits, we were there to help navigate these new challenges that were coming upon us. Again, we were getting the news just at the same time as they were, but we wanted to make sure that they knew that we were a resource in the community, and we wanted to be there for them to help during these times. So that was right during the start of the pandemic. We turned that letter around in one day, and then immediately went and walked, and of course wearing masks and gloves, because we at the time didn't know how the virus was going to be transmitted. And I want to emphasize too, this picture at the top right corner, like this was a typically very busy time in the day during the lunch hour for most businesses. If anyone has been to the Convoy District, you'll know there's barely parking anytime. And it was such a weird feeling to see these empty parking lots. So this was not the only empty parking lot that we were seeing. It was up and down the neighborhood, all of our neighborhoods. We just saw no one there, again, due to the news of the shutdown. So it was very important for us to just, again, be a resource during these times for everyone as they were navigating it, and come together immediately to support, and support also in the languages that they're most comfortable with. So for the next slide. We, again, through the year, it was a very hard time for our businesses overall, all small businesses, even us as you know, family members. We had a tough time navigating like the schools closing, but they were facing all of these challenges in addition to compounding effects of the pandemic. So there you might be able to see a couple articles like this one from NBC News talking about how Asian American owned businesses especially suffered outsized tolls. These tolls include things like how the national leadership referred to the virus as the Chinese virus, and unfortunately that ended up stemming into, you know, businesses being defaced, in addition to being harassed. Corinne spoke about how our community members were even, you know, being targeted and yelled at just for being Asian. And so this is the national news that our community was sharing and was seeing, and it was just, again, outsized tolls of challenges on our Asian Pacific Islander owned businesses, because they had to, again, come to work every day, navigate these new challenges of closing, switching to go. A lot of them only operated in cash, and then we moved to we were moving to a cashless system. So coming together to teach them how to move to those processes. And also we were seeing, as things were rolling out, we were seeing funding come out to support small businesses during these times from like the Small Business Administration, city relief funds, county relief funds. But it was very important for us to recognize that a lot of the time these were coming out only in English, and they were coming out with very short deadlines. And for someone who doesn't have English as their first language, it was very hard to navigate these new applications that were coming out. For the first time, a lot of these businesses were starting to document their record keeping and accounting in the American way for these applications. And so what you'll see is a lot of the family members had to come in and support these businesses and their grandparents and their parents as they navigated these new challenges and tried to get them access to these resources. And it was also very important for us as the Asian Business Association to really emphasize with our Small Business Development Center that we have these resources and translators available at no cost to them. So it was very important for us to step up in this way to, again, support them in navigating through all of these new applications, these new funding sources that were becoming available. And then also at the same time advocate to make sure that these disadvantaged businesses who have digital barriers, they have language barriers. At times, it was very important for us to emphasize that we should set aside, a portion of these funds, especially to the businesses who have been hit the hardest, like our Asian and Pacific Islander-owned businesses, because again, they're navigating new challenges that they never would have seen coming. And so those were just some of the effects of the pandemic on our businesses. And the next one that I really wanted to emphasize that probably was the hardest for all of us in so many different ways is that, and again, please give me some grace because I do get emotional about this. And it's pretty tough to talk about this, but people who look like our mothers, who look like our grandparents were targeted in their own work establishments, places that they thought they were safe. And so, excuse me, these were the families affected. The bottom left corner is particularly hard because I saw the GoFundMe that those sons had to set up because their mother was lost, and they have to navigate, finding a new home, how they're gonna, fend for themselves. And so, again, excuse me, I get very emotional about this. This affected our community so much because this could have been our mother, this could have been our grandmother, and no one deserves to feel unsafe in their own workplace where they've worked so hard to build a moment and a dream for their families. So I'm gonna go to a blank slide just to, again, sit with those feelings because that was probably the toughest challenge that our communities have been facing, because it then made us think, is my mom safe? Is my father safe wherever they may be in the world? A lot of us move away from our families at different points in our lives, but it really made us realize, how are they being affected and why are they being affected in this way? And so that was just, again, some of the biggest ways that our community was affected. Think about the parents and grandparents that run these businesses in lots of different communities. And they themselves were then thinking, am I safe to come into my own workplace? Why should I keep going on with all these new challenges? And so we have seen that a lot of the businesses in our community, especially of older generations, it was just time for them to retire. The effects of the pandemic took its toll on a lot of communities. And, they took time then for themselves to close their business and move forward. So again, these are just some of the things and ways that our communities have been affected. These are ways that our businesses have had to navigate national news and national happenings. And then also, just wondering themselves, are these going to be happenings that we see in our own community here in San Diego? So again, those are just some of the ways that we've been affected. I want to talk about now going forward, ways that we can support. I mentioned this in the beginning, but we're very, very proud of the Convoy District, especially because the San Diego City Council named it a Pan-Asian Cultural Business Innovation Hub. And we really wanted to, again, be seen for our efforts in contributing to our communities, the hard work that our communities have put forward to serve all of us. And again, highlight it going forward. How do we keep building with our communities? How do we keep building and bridging more opportunities for them? And so again, I cannot stress the importance enough of supporting local businesses, supporting mom and pop shops who are essentially supporting their families' dreams for a better future. Other ways that you can support, I want to emphasize safety. So this is one of our awesome clients in the neighborhood. They own a nail and hair salon. They were affected, of course, because there was just so many indoor closures and they weren't allowed to open for so many months on end. So they were just happy to get back to it all. But one important thing to do is keep our community safe. You know, please wear your mask if it is your choice, again, to get vaccinated, but it does mean you keep other people safe who are at the front lines. And so I think that's going to be another very important way that you can support our communities during these times that have been hit the hardest. And coming up, we're so very proud of Asian Pacific American Heritage Month coming up in May. Again, to celebrate the accomplishments that we've all had as a community, and then also in light of the hate that we are seeing in our community, we want to spread love into our communities during May and celebrate them going forward, because we really could use a lot more of that. And so a few community events that I'd love to share, and there will be lots and lots in May if you just tap into all the wonderful Asian and Pacific Islander organizations that exist in San Diego, but here's just a few coming up in the next few days. The youth are hosting it's like a Twitch live stream. It's called Raise Happiness, but it's really to, again, raise awareness about what's happening in our communities, educate them, and also provide resources to them to heal during these times. So they're going to be having lots of Asian Pacific Islander arts performers, lots of youth coming forward to speak out on it, and they'll be raising funds for the Stop API Hate campaign, which Judy spoke on earlier. Another wonderful thing that she shared was the San Diego Asian Film Festival. Right now, they're actually in their spring showcase. One of the best ways to know and learn more about our communities is watch their stories through film. Watch the documentaries, watch the feature films that show what our community has to offer and also what our community is going through. So I would highly recommend, if you want and you love watching movies or films, just take some time to watch one with the San Diego Asian Film Festival Spring Showcase, which is happening now. And then the last one, if any of you are API or know someone in your community that is API or just want to listen in, we are having a community conversation with the San Diego Asian Pacific Islander Coalition. We'll be having 2 virtual sessions, one on Tuesday, May 4th, and the other on Saturday, May 8th. We'll also be having an online forum in case anyone can't attend either of those, just to share their experience, what they're going through in the community. And us as the Asian Pacific Islander Coalition, we're going to be taking these topics and this feedback and figuring out what action steps can we be taking with our 30+ organizations to support those issues that our community is bringing forward. So again, these are just a few of the Asian Pacific Islander American Heritage Month events that are coming up in May. Definitely tap into your local community to support them there, and spread love where you can, and support our local small businesses as well. Thank you so much for listening. Every action we take supports each other, or every action we take to support each other really makes a difference, especially during these times. And I'm always happy to connect. There's a couple different organizations that I'm part of, so I'm happy to always connect and see where we could build and support each other going forward. So thanks everyone for listening.
Thank you so much, Lauren. I know we've touched on a lot of topics today that were kind of hard to get through, but I'm glad that we were able to end on a positive note with several ideas of how we can get involved, and it's good timing with May starting in a couple days here. So we have received a number of questions from our audience, and Lori's going to help me out with the Q&A. Are you ready, Lori?
Like, yeah. So we have a question from Jane Andrews, who asked to spell out in a little bit more detail the ways that we can support the API community. I think in reference to perhaps Lauren's comments about having a seat at the table here in San Diego, as well as the state and national arenas. So or maybe Judy, any of you who wants to take that, that general question about having a seat at the table and support.
I'll go ahead and jump in. One of the things that I personally do is, because I understand many in our communities are limited English proficient, because as a teacher, I taught with San Diego Unified for 30 years, and I was in Mira Mesa for 17 years. And I do understand that people don't get civically engaged and they don't vote if they have a language barrier. And I speak Chinese, and that's why I do what I do. I go to Ranch 99, I help register voters and explain to them in their own language about how to become civically engaged. And so if you know a neighbor who needs help with voting, I sit with some of my neighbors who just mark the ballots because they're limited English proficient. So it really helps that we explain to them how important it is for them to become civically engaged, because there's strength in numbers. If we want to elect people who look and sound like us, we need to vote. So that's my bit.
Excellent, we aligned there.
I'd also like to add, earlier we mentioned for the API Coalition, we are intentional about getting API representatives, again, on our city, county, state, national advisories, boards, commissions, and into elected office. So we are not that it's solely you can't win a seat, you have to earn a seat. It's not just based on identity politics. However, that representation, that voice from people who have actually worked, grew up, live in the communities that they are asking to represent is critical.
Yeah.
Right now, as a trustee, I'm the only API woman in office in our entire county right now. And I cannot be the only one. We're already having conversations with folks to make sure that we leave that door open and make sure that others come in. But to all those who are sitting on boards and commissions, to our electeds, to our chairs, we ask you to seek out people. We are actually forming a list of folks who are interested to make sure that they're represented and that we pipeline them into these positions as well.
Excellent. All right, Kim, do you want to have another question?
Yes. So one of our board members pointed out that our office is actually right on Balboa in the Convoy District. And so we're perfectly placed there to take advantage of all those great restaurants and things. And she was wondering if there are any thoughts of sponsoring a night market again. She thought that was a great event for the neighborhood.
Absolutely, and I have the fun of being the person who puts on that said night market. It's a big thing though for me as an event producer, and I think anyone who just cares about their community, we have to keep them safe. So especially at the city level right now, we're watching how this month and next month go for these reopenings, what it looks like. And again, keeping that in mind going forward. So we are in the plans of doing sort of smaller, more intimate pop-up night market experiences in the neighborhood and bringing people back to doing that safely. But it's just, we're doing a little bit of a slow transition to get back to that again, just to make sure that our communities are kept safe first, because they have been hit the hardest. We have high case rates within our communities, and we've also seen a lot of loss in our communities too at the same time. So again, I think it's very important for us to do this safely, but yes, the answer in short is yes, we are definitely going to be doing that again to bring people together for our community.
Excellent.
Good. Also, would you mind putting in the chat the registration links for those other upcoming events that you mentioned?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, let me go grab those links.
Thank you. Okay, we have another question from Dahlia Balmer. She is a league member who asks, how can the AAPI and Black communities advocate and learn from each other as both communities are fighting a similar fight against an oppressive system and interpersonal racism?
I'm going to jump right in. After the George Floyd event last summer, I was very heartened to see how many of our young AAPIs were out there marching with our Black sisters and brothers. Now, for myself, I had to stay home because of my age and my vulnerability to the pandemic. I did not participate. Normally, under normal circumstances, you know, I would be out there and I would be out there with the clipboard to register people to vote. But so yes, you are seeing, back during the Rodney King riots after the thing, the media really did help perpetuate the animosity between the new immigrants from the Korean community with the Black community. But we are now hopefully beyond that. And we are seeing more coordination and more partnership. So that's actually an excellent question. So we would love to do more of that.
We actually have two efforts. One is the Asian Solidarity Collective, which is based here in San Diego. The executive director is DJ Cotton Candy Tan. Now I will say Asian Solidarity Collective has now grown to statewide and national proportions, and they were formed specifically to look at ways for the Asian community to act in solidarity with Black lives. Like I mentioned earlier, when we talk about addressing hate, the focus of today is hate against our API communities, but there has been hate against so many communities for so long. For so long, and we cannot advocate for our own protection and not advocate for others. And we need to make sure that any kind of safety measures that we are asking for does not actually lead to harms against other Black and brown bodies. We cannot do that. The People's Collective for Justice and Liberation is also another national effort. They're based in San Diego and in DC, but they are nationwide. They're also acting in solidarity with not only Black lives. I saw in the Q&A, there was a question of immigration. We also address immigration. The API community is heavily impacted by immigration. We haven't touched on that yet, but that is an issue that we are seeing for our Southeast Asians. We are seeing people deported. We actually just had a number of Vietnamese and Cambodian folks deported last month, which is an issue. And so again, all these issues intertwine and relate to each other. There have been movements for quite some time. Even the Fight for Ethnic Studies that started in Berkeley was done with Black and API and Latinx organizations. And in that same vein of shared wellness, shared community, we'll continue to act in that kind of solidarity with each other. We have to.
Yeah.
Thank you. We also have a question from our board member, Jane Andrews. What policies would you like to see the current City Council and Board of Supervisors endorse? Anything on your wish list right now?
We actually do, if it's okay for me to bring it up. And if folks, I dropped the SDAPI Coalition website earlier, but we do have specific asks following up on the resolutions. Like Judy mentioned, we need translation services, we need language access, and that representation. We also do want an examination of API businesses' access to the city's small business relief and development programs. We want to partner with the city's Office of Race Equity, make sure that our advisory board, there is a Mayor's API Advisory Board that will be launching next month. And we want to just make sure that we're collaborating with all of our public entities to make sure our voices are heard and represented.
And one more thing that popped into my mind, I was getting my monthly groceries down at 99 Ranch, and the young woman, the cashier, saw my button that said I was vaccinated. She was so excited, and but with the limited language and the digital divide, they couldn't even know how to get an appointment for vaccine, right? So I know this is something I could get ABA to help, with these small businesses, right? With 99 Ranch, they really need help because of the language barrier and the digital divide. And they're frontline workers. They're out there dealing with, the cashier at the grocery store. So I just want to throw that in there, get them some help.
Yeah, to speak and sort of add on to that, like I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but when we do see like new sources of funding come out as resources, as grants, as elected officials, maybe think about setting aside a portion of those funds towards disadvantaged minority-owned businesses, again, who are facing multiple barriers to get access to these resources. But again, they are very much being affected. We are seeing a lot of them close down, unfortunately, and then that affects, again, their families and neighborhoods that they're in. So again, thinking about setting aside funds for disadvantaged minority-owned businesses. I know that we did a press conference last week with the Sacramento Chamber of Commerce, Cal Asian, about AB 915. But it's really to use the state's purchasing power to think about setting aside, again, a portion of those funds to get access to minority-owned businesses, and setting aside a quarter of that and using that purchasing power to support new vendors within the state. So thinking about things like that as well.
Thank you. Well, while we're talking about politics and policy, Corinne touched on immigration a little bit earlier, and we in San Diego tend to think mostly about immigration in terms of our southern border, but I'd like for you to just expand on it a little bit more, because I think it's important for us as an organization and our members to hear, that it's a little bit broader than what we've been led to believe, and that our situation is we are a border city, but we also have immigration issues that extend beyond our southern border. So if you would just take a minute and just talk about that, and just enlighten our membership today about AAPI immigration and any issues or policies that could be improved to make that a better process and experience.
Sure. So, for us, it's a little bit complicated. So what it tends to look like for the API community, there are two different things. We have people who come over as refugees, and depending on the country that they came over from, gosh, I want to make sure I'm not giving out the wrong populations, but there could be one Southeast Asian community who had an agreement maybe for a refugee status for 20, 25 years, maybe, right? The expectation typically, though, is that after that 20, 25 years, they're going to be okay to stay here in this country. You have whole generations that are born between that time frame. But we're actually seeing some of these communities that have been here on refugee status since the 80s. Now we have certain states saying, okay, well, I guess it's time for you to go back, back to your countries of origin. And they're like, what do you mean? I've made a whole life here now. So we're seeing some of those issues come up. We are seeing visas becoming overstayed sometimes. Honestly, we have people who may have been brought over as children who frankly don't know that they are undocumented. They literally don't know. Jose Antonio Vargas, I know his name sounds very Latino, but he is Filipino. He has a great story. It's been published in Time in several publications about that. He was brought over when he was 12, and he didn't know that he was undocumented until he tried to get a driver's license. I can tell you, when I used to work at a certain community clinic, we also had a legal clinic that was specifically trying to help women whose green cards were being held hostage by their abusive partners. So we do have API women who come over. They come over through marriage, hoping to gain citizenship, and the people who bring them over end up raping them, abusing them, and holding them hostage. So that's a whole other layer of this work that we're trying to do. So the Violence Against Women's Act, actually, VAWA has been a very key policy to support that work. That was actually put on hold during the last presidential administration. So we're hoping that gets refunded and rebooted so we can continue to do that kind of work. But immigration is a really complicated thing. I also want to note the first Dreamer student was right?
Yep. Chinese American.
There you go. from out of East Coast.
Yeah.
It almost passed. We would have had DACA much earlier, much earlier, and then 9/11 hit.
Right.
And brown people were blamed for everything, right? So that's what immigration looks like. I think here locally in San Diego, it's really interesting the relationships that we have with ICE. Remember that ICE didn't exist prior to 9/11. So what can we do to rethink immigration, imagine what that looks like, so that we're not discriminating against people.
Thank you. Also, I want to let everyone know we will send out a follow-up email with all of the links for the upcoming events, the groups, and also the books and movies that were mentioned. And then we have one final question. Someone asked, she said, I'm thinking there are at least 3 pockets of API neighborhoods in San Diego. Is there a way to bring Linda Vista, Mira Mesa, and Convoy District together in the city's redistricting process to allow an API representative to run for office?
Can I take that one, Judy?
But I was gonna say D6 is 10 years ago, the census came out and the redistricting, and we fought really hard to get D6 to be the API empowerment seat. And I hate to say it, since you guys brought it up, D3 has been very, very successful. D3 is the LGBT empowerment seat. And look at the powerhouses that came out of D3. We are way behind. We need to unite, and we need allies. We need allies. We can't just do it all on our own. You know, the D6, if Kate turns out and we don't put one of us, not me, somebody who is from our community in there to represent, that is the API empowerment seat. We need to fight to keep it. That's all I'm gonna say about that.
Well, that's powerful.
I'll just add that, you know, please also connect with the organizations who have been building those neighborhoods, who are directly working with those communities. Again, they have longstanding support. They have longstanding visions themselves. In the Convoy neighborhood alone, we have seen the Kearny Mesa plan update go up, and there's lots of new attention coming to the area of what this neighborhood could look like with housing being added. But again, we don't want to erase the cultures that help build it, and we want to make sure that we're working with all the organizations who have made these wonderful districts and neighborhoods we're part of.
And I'll add to that two things I just really want to stress. We know that D6, absolutely, that is an API empowerment district. It was redistricted in that way. We do also have other pockets. We know in D5, there's a significant population there. Rancho Peñasquitos, National City, of course, all the Filipinos are National City, Chula Vista, Paradise Hills, where I grew up. And even down south in D9, we do have significant population there along Ocean View. But, you know, again, going back to representation and how you support, you know, it's one thing to say I support a community, but what does that actually look like? That means, are you actually going to share power? Are you actually going to make sure that when a job is open, a leadership position is open, you think first, who can we recruit that is Black, Indigenous, Asian, Latinx? Right? When we're looking at leadership and who to run, are you going to back someone who is API qualified? Yes. But that's what that looks like. And we do have Kentley, who is running in D6. We do have people who are running, and he's not the only API person, but we do have folks who are running for that seat for next year.
Excellent. Even though we're a nonpartisan organization and we don't support candidates or parties, I fully, and this organization fully endorses representation and appropriate representation. And we are all for and behind the idea of having communities being representative in their elected officials, the census recognizing and acknowledging and districting for communities, et cetera. So I applaud your efforts on pulling individuals out to represent and push them up there and helping them run and giving them the resources and encouragement they need to run and be representative of the community. So I want to thank you all. Our panelists were excellent today. This is really one of my favorite events we've hosted in a while. So I just truly appreciate everybody who came out and made time to participate in this. I specifically, as I said, want to thank our panelists. Very compelling presentations today, and thank our attendees for coming. Our attendees will all get an opportunity to fill out a survey regarding their the experience they had today, and the survey will be posted in the chat right now. So go take a look, click on your chat and fill out your survey so we can get some good feedback and improve our presentations and our programs as we go forward. So with that, I'd like to invite you all to have an enjoyable rest of your day, and we look forward to seeing everyone again at our next event.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.